The distinguishing factor of the Model 1842 is, of course, its percussion bolster, which has the percussion nipple threaded into it. And this was really the advent of a new form of priming. Before then, you relied on an indeterminate amount of powder in your paper cartridge to prime your flash pan for your flintlock. This time, U.S. troops were issued with these four-wing flanged musket caps. This was something that really made these guns a lot more reliable. I mean, we all have heard the term flash in the pan, and that was a nod toward the fact that flintlock muskets could be unreliable at times. Percussion priming wasn't as adversely impacted by bad weather as was a flintlock priming mechanism. So this was a huge advance in the military capability of the U.S. Army in the middle of the 19th century.
So more than 270,000 Model 1842s were manufactured. And something occurred after the United States had adopted really the perfect smoothbore musket. The 1842 is perfect, right? Well, that's until a Frenchman got involved, and his name was Minie, Claude Minie. Different countries had different ideas on exactly how the bullet should be shaped or what kind of grooves it should have. But you have a conical projectile, and it has better aerodynamics, but it's got a hollow base. And so what happens is when the powder charge detonates, the gases expand, there's an explosion, obviously, and then the skirt of the bullet will grip the rifling, because the big problem with rifles was it's hard to get a bullet to go down the barrel. But if you have an undersized Minie-style bullet, it's just as easy to drop that in as it is to put an undersized ball down the barrel. And the concept of the rifle musket was revolutionary, because musket, right up until they started with rifle muskets, it means smoothbore. And this is a hybrid of the two. The barrels are rifled, and what you get is more velocity and better accuracy, but you still have that same rapidity of loading that you had with the musket.
Of course, rifles had been used since the American Revolution, but they were never issued as a general standard arm. There were always separate units that were selectively issued with rifles, rather than the general soldier being issued with a rifle. That all changed with the U.S. Model 1855 rifle musket.
It's really the most beautiful of the United States standard military shoulder arms for the U.S. Army. It's a three-banded rifled musket with beautiful rifle sights, a patch box, and it also had the unique property of having a Maynard tape unit on the gun to prime the rifle. It was something that was rarely used because the Maynard tape system proved to be impractical.
At the time that the Civil War broke out in America, the U.S. Army had decided that this Maynard tape system that they pinned their hopes on back in 1855 was really not working. The caps could get wet and not fire, and the mechanism could get out of whack easily. And so they simply said, let's do away with the Maynard tape and simply produce the same 1855 rifle musket, but without the Maynard tape. But interestingly, since the hammer and the bolster were already set up that way, they retained the old humpback hammer that was configured to go over the former Maynard tape system. This is the rifle musket that was most used in the American Civil War in the North. And there was over 20 different private manufacturers who, up through 1863, were making these 1861 Springfields under contract for the War Department.
Following the American Civil War, the U.S. Army has a little bit of a problem. The issue is they have literally millions of these muzzle-loading muskets on hand. They made more than 1 million Model 1861 Springfields at Springfield Armory and also from the various subcontractors. I mean, there's just every kind of subcontractor under the sun because the government, especially early on, was handing out contracts left and right to anyone who said they could make these guns. Well, the 1860s were a time of technological advancement, and it becomes pretty clear that the self-contained cartridge is going to be the way of the future, and that breech-loading firearms are really the next step in military arms evolution. The United States really knew they needed to have a breech-loading design to compete, but they can't afford to just do nothing with all of these muskets they've made over the course of, 4 years of war.
So the self-contained metallic cartridge is the coming thing. And the master armorer of Springfield Armory, Erskine S. Allen, turned his attention to, what to do with 1 million rifle muskets that you just bought for a war that you're no longer in. And he came up with the Allen conversion, or as we call it, the Trapdoor Springfield. He had started with 58 caliber rimfire rounds, just to make use of the 1 million Springfields laying around. But it turns out that, with a cartridge gun, maybe you don't need it to be 58 caliber. So they started experimenting. They took it down to 50 caliber. And eventually by 1873, only 8 years after the Civil War had ended, they went with what we call the Trapdoor Springfield, the U.S. Model 1873, chambered in a cartridge that's still used a lot today, and that's the 4570 Government.
And basically, cock the hammer back to half cock, had a little lever, and you threw the breech block hinged forward and up. Insert a cartridge, close it again, pull it back to full cock, and fire. This enabled the individual soldier to take cover. You could actually shoot it laying down because you could reload it laying down. And so the old tactics that had governed the battlefield for centuries with linear tactics was quickly becoming a thing of the past because of this new trapdoor system.
At the time, it was a black powder arm. It shot a 4.58-inch projectile weighing about 405 grains and backed by 70 grains of black powder. So that's where you get the 4570 name from. And this remains the standard U.S. service arm until the 1890s. And again, in the 1890s, you have another arms revolution happening. That's when you get the advent of smokeless powder. Of course, French chemist Paul Vier innovates with poudre B. And quickly there's an arms race among the nations of the world to see how quickly can they arm themselves with a smokeless powder military arm.
When you want to develop a modern infantry rifle, you should follow the leading nations of the world. And in this case, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department decided that leading nation was Norway. And there was a rifle developed by Eric Jorgensen and Ole Krag. So the U.S. military adopts this gun first in 1892. They continue to make and adopt new models, slight variations, right up until our next major gun.
What makes the rifle noteworthy in American military history is that it is the first metallic cartridge firing, repeating bolt-action rifle that's adopted. Now, the Krag is different than other metallic cartridge firing, repeating rifles that were available at the time because of the layout of the magazine. With the magazine that moves beneath the bolt, with cartridges that are then moved by power of the spring in the magazine from below, up, and around into a feedway so that they can be introduced in the chamber. That was a design that differed significantly than the standard repeating bolt-action rifles that were being used by other countries at the time. This comes at a critical and sensitive time, too, because what's right around the bend is the perfection in the bolt-action rifle design in the form of the Mauser, We don't really see perfection in the Mauser until 1898. That's still years away. But where we stand at the point that the 1892 Krag rifle is adopted by the American military is that the Mauser was a design still very much in development.